our agenda today. So Sean, at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. I first want to just go through a quick tour of Microsoft Teams so that people have the basic functionalities down. I'm going to take it off the slides real quick and just share the screen that you all are seeing of the platform. Can you all see my screen here? So just some of the common features, the ability to unmute your microphone. You see here on that bottom bar. And so please, if you're not talking, just try and keep your microphone muted, and that we can eliminate some of the background noise. For showing the conversation, you can show or hide the conversation, or what we call the chat box. And so on the right-hand column, it pops up. And if you scroll to the top, we've actually included the packet for today's meeting. And so if you want to access that, the related meeting materials for today, you have that at the top of the chat box. And then as we go through the meeting, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to add those to the chat box as we go, and we can address them through the process. Lastly, just the show participants, if you want to see who else is on the call today, there's the list on the right-hand column as well of who's on today's call. So those are some of the basic. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we are recording today's webinar, and we'll have a link to send around after as well. So know that you can pass this recording on to those that weren't able to attend today. So with that, I'll take it back to the slides. Just a quick overview on today's agenda. We're going to cover some of the general updates on some of the MPO program activities, not only related to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on some of the basic core products that we're in the process of updating and preparing, including the Unified Transportation Plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, and the Unified Planning Work Program. Then we're going to turn it over to Max Baker and Daniel Jarrett from UrbanSim to cover growth and development forecast for the Unified Transportation Plan, both covering a general overview on the UrbanSim model, which is new to this process, as well as talking through some of the initial results of those forecasts for households and employment. And then we'll also cover some other updates as well on call for projects, as well as the recent CARES Act stimulus package and what that has in terms of impact on public transit in the region. And we are aware of the statewide call that is happening at 11, and so we will make sure that we adjourn so that you guys can get onto that call. So within your packet, there was a couple of letters requesting flexibility as a result of the COVID-19. One from a joint letter from a number of national associations. That was a letter to the U.S. congressional leadership asking for flexibility with federal funding and deadlines. We included that in your packet, as well as a letter from the TPB chair to FHWA, our federal partners, and TDOT, requesting flexibility with some of the deadlines associated with some of the federal programs that we are in the process of plans that we're in the process of updating. We also received a response from FHWA to that letter, and if Mayor Reed, you want to talk through a couple of items specific from that letter?
Absolutely. One of the things when we saw kind of what was beginning to happen with statewide, with the shutdown and all. We wanted to make sure that FHWA understood that continuing on for staff as well as this board was a top priority, but we also knew that we were probably going to need some flexibility. In talking with some of the mayors over the past couple of weeks, some of the things that we were thinking about were, some of us have limited bandwidth to be able to engage in some of the analytics that we were needing to do in long range policy making while the Safer at Home order was in place. We also had some discussion and thought about that, it's really important for us to get the community engagement part of this process. And that's a little bit difficult to do with the social distancing as well as the level of anxiety that people are having right now. I think mostly people are thinking about the health issues as well as the economy. So we were hoping that given a little time that people will begin thinking about transportation again. Also, I want you all to understand, and I wanted FHWA to understand that our staff is continuing to do the technical work as best they can from home and with online meetings themselves, but we wanted to see if we couldn't defer the discussion about timelines until once things get back to a little bit of sense of normalcy. So those were the things that I was trying to convey to FHWA in asking for some flexibility with timelines. It also sounds like people across the country are doing the exact same thing that we are in asking. So I just wanted them to know right from the beginning that it was important that we do understand the importance of these activities, but we also wanted them to know we needed a little flexibility. So, Sean, anything else from staff's perspective that you wanted to add about the letter?
No, I'll just add that, as you mentioned, we're continuing forward on a number of the technical work items, such as traffic congestion, roadway safety, economic growth and development, and the environmental analysis. And we had check-ins with the TCC online webinars that were informational like this on March 25th, as well as April 8th, and we'll continue to do that as we navigate in a more virtual environment.
Well, and also we had a call yesterday with FHWA and TDOT and reiterated that this is definitely a priority for us, but over the last 30 days that the mayors have had quite a bit on our plate, and even though transportation is a top priority for us, it wasn't necessarily on the very top of the list over the last 30 days that we've kind of been dealing with other stuff that we don't normally have to deal with. So I think they heard that and understood.
And then just switching gears over to the Transportation Improvement Program, some of the other activities underway. We do have a 4-year Transportation Improvement Program, which was adopted in October, runs through federal fiscal years 2020 through 2023. If you recall, I believe the February meeting, we endorsed Cycle B amendments. They underwent public review and comment, but we have deferred adoption of those amendments until May, given that there wasn't an urgent need to adopt those in April. And then on the Unified Transportation Planning Work Program, as you know, we have a 2-year work program that was adopted in August. And so staff is in the process of drafting amendment for that second year to guide us through federal fiscal year 2021. And as part of that, we'll incorporate any additional planning activities that are being conducted by locals, transit agencies, or TDOT within the region. Now I want to turn it over to Max Baker, our Director of Research and Analytics, as well as Daniel Jarrett from UrbanSim, and they're going to talk through some of the regional land use forecasts, as well as the model, as well as some of the initial forecasts. So I'll continue to advance the slides, but Max, do you want to take it away?
Yep, thanks, Sean. Good morning, everybody. I will try and respect everybody's time given the limited amount that we have. But Sean, go to the next slide. Wanted to catch everybody up on the progress that we've been making since the last time that we talked about forecasted population and employment. Just as a recap, why do we forecast? Is to understand the pattern of growth that we expect to see in the future so that we can make responsible decisions on how we invest in our public infrastructure. Also gives us the ability to test different scenarios for growth and see the implications that may arise from it. Why do we predict at the parcel level? I believe last time presented to you county level control totals and explained that we want to aim small and miss small when going at the parcel level. So the ultimate goal is to get it to a TAZ or a census block level. If you're familiar with census blocks, that is what is ultimately used as input into the travel demand model, which you guys typically see the output for, to evaluate projects. So we actually go sub TAZ in hopes that we won't miss that mark as far when we aggregate it back up. How do we do this? In the past, we have used community viz software. We're actually transforming to a new platform, UrbanSim, which Daniel will speak to here in a second. But essentially, it's a land use allocation model built hand in hand with our staff as well as the UrbanSim consultants. It's based on a lot of local data, so tax assessor data, zoning and future land use information that you have provided to us. And Sean, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. And why do we do this and what's the output? Predicts the land development characteristics. So not only what does that development pattern look like, but what are the types of housing, what's the density, what's the pricing, and what's the land use type that we see spread across our land in the future. Also can look at different types of employment, and ultimately can be used as inputs into other models that can give us kind of a litmus test or a measure of effectiveness for different things such as travel demand, air quality, and other environmental impacts. Next slide. And with this, I'll turn it over to Daniel Jarrett. He's been helping us out on the UrbanSim side with the development of our land use model.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for giving me a little bit of time. I'll also try to keep everything brief. I also just want to say up front, I actually did spend 7 years at the Denver MPO as their chief economist, implementing an UrbanSim model, but I do have a very strong appreciation for all the work that all the organizations and jurisdictions in your region put together, you know, to bring a forecast together and all the other associated work. So I've been through a few of those cycles. So prior, I've been with UrbanSim since 2018, and I've kind of been on the early stages of development. If we can jump to the next slide. What I want to do today is just give you kind of an overview of just the model system and what we're trying to do, working hand in hand with Max and his team and others. So what UrbanSim is a land use modeling system. The history of this goes back probably about 20 years or so with Dr. Paul Waddell, who's now at the University of California, Berkeley. It's been in various stages of development over that time period, a lot of grant funding, has brought it on board. We're probably the most widely used system for land use allocation in the United States, and we have actually now moved to multiple international areas over the last year, including Bogota, Colombia, Lima, Peru, Melbourne, Australia. So we do have some international exposure as well. So if we can go to the next slide. So UrbanSim is really trying to represent the interaction of a set of agents in your region. And so that includes obviously households, and then businesses or employers or employees. And then how do those agents interact with government regulation that would come in the form of local zoning, land use plans, transportation. So this model is designed to help support the needs of your activity-based travel model, and then also be able to take some of that and feed it back into the model. And then something that's unique is we are trying to represent the overall kind of regional real estate market, and how land development will occur in the future based on current regulatory environment, and then being able to run scenarios off of that as well, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. So next slide would be great. So UrbanSim, there's a lot of data involved. I've been working closely with Max and my colleagues here and his colleagues over the last year to develop the data, and the data development is very intense for this first time to get the model stood up. And one of the reasons why is that we are trying to make this model as unique as we can to the GNRC region. So that means really taking a deep dive into local data, really trying to understand how past behaviors and past development patterns can then impact the future. So the way that UrbanSim really works is it runs a set of statistical models off of all of this baseline data that we've been producing and creating over the last year. And so it will represent things like real estate prices. And what it does do is it starts with a macroeconomic forecast that comes exogenously to us. So that's something that Max and his team provided to us. And it gives us an idea of how many people and how many jobs are going to come into the region over the next few decades. And so what this model will do is then each year take those new households and jobs and try to place them down to, in this case, a parcel level. And it's a set of statistical models that are conditioned upon household characteristics. So a very simple kind of broad-based example would be if a household, for example, if we observe a household and the data would come from the census and it's a family of 5 and they have medium to high income, the model will be conditioned and trained well enough to try to put them into a space that actually fits their needs. So they wouldn't end up, say, in a 1-bedroom or a studio apartment in downtown Nashville. They'd end up probably somewhere where the space kind of meets their needs. And also, when we think about where households and jobs locate, we can take into account things like travel skims. So we can actually test and see, does accessibility to certain areas, to job centers, does that have an impact on where people in jobs would choose to locate? And then what makes this model also a little bit more unique at the very end is that then after we kind of see where households and jobs want to go, obviously there's going to be some imbalance for space represented by square footage and on the commercial side, and it can be housing units on the residential side. And so then the model actually kind of plays the role of a real estate developer and will evaluate parcels constrained by zoning, for example, and say if there's a need for single family homes, it will look at all the areas within a county, for example, and choose to potentially create new development in an area that's zoned correctly and has current capacity. So there's a dynamic that's going on between the actors in the model. So if we can go to the next slide. I'm going to go quickly through, this is just kind of some theoretical background. All I really want to tell you is that, a lot of the same framework and theory that drives a lot of the development of activity-based travel models are being used in this model as well. So we are trying to represent individual household and individual employer behavior. And this is just, a little bit of the background on that. So next slide, please. Just a few more slides I'll kind of go through, but we just always kind of want to throw up that, this is very well grounded in theory. So from a statistical standpoint, from an urban economics standpoint, from a price standpoint. So we are using best practices as we're trying to calibrate this model using all that base data that we collect up front, and then also that's how we calibrate the model over some period of time that we can observe in history, so we can then better represent behavior going forward into the future.
Unknown participant is now exiting.
If we can go to the next slide. And actually, I'm going to have you go one more after that. So this is, I'll make a quick note on this. So everything that we do is open source as far as our code base. So we want to be very transparent. We have a lot of collaborators from around the country. We invite MPOs who we work with who have our models to give back to the code, and we can make improvements, and that can be something that can be shared across. So I just really kind of want to make a point that we are very widely used, and there's a very strong community out there for support from us to MPOs and MPO to MPO. That's something that one of my larger roles here at Urban Sim is kind of facilitate that communication. So next slide, please. Right, and then one more. Okay, so one of the other things that we've tried to implement that hopefully GNRC and you all will find benefits is that everything here is run on the cloud. We've tried to be as forward-thinking as we can to take a lot of that demand away from you as far as having to have servers on your end. So everything that we do is actually cloud-based, and we've got a great user interface that staff at GNRC will be working with to be able to run baseline forecasts and then also scenarios into the future. So, we're trying to reduce the technical requirements of the model as much as we can. So, next slide, please. Okay, and one more, please. Okay, so this is where I'm going to end here. And so this is basically what you are all going through right now, and we've been helping. So this is basically what a typical forecast would look like. We would take a macroeconomic forecast that is exogenous to this modeling system, and then we work closely with Max and his team to basically to find some of the data that we just don't know, that are available. And this could be things that are in the pipeline in your region that you have certainty or some level of certainty that may or may not be built. We can add that to the model. We can add in additional development constraints. So that could be zoning, that could be just pure land constraints. And then there can also be model adjustments, and we say sparingly because we know that there are going to be some areas of the region where the model just doesn't perform well. One of the things we always like to say, and I can say this from using this model for over a decade, is if GNRC and any other MPO can use this model and get say 80 to 90% there, then it's that expert judgment that comes from all the jurisdictions kind of giving their inputs that really kind of makes the forecast what it is in a region. So there's a bit of iteration that goes through where basically we're right now, for example, we're running a forecast, and then we're giving the results to Max's team, and they're looking at it and saying, hey, the model looks like it's performing really well over here, but it maybe isn't representing inside this county as well. And we go back and we take a look at this underlying statistical models. We see if it's something maybe that's data related. So there's a fair amount of iteration that goes on, which is collaborative, and it helps us and it helps all of you learn quite a bit about the region and the region's data. And then, what we end with is a development pattern into 2045 that obviously then can drive your not only your travel forecast, but also then you'd be able to run other land use scenarios off of it. The last thing I'll say just about people who are using this, actually, if we go to the next slide, might help make a point. Here's a representation in the US and internationally of who's using the model right now. And, each one of these models has been calibrated to try to capture the uniqueness of that region. And each one of these metropolitan areas also has a completely different set of scenarios. But just to give you some flavor of what people are testing, for example, and things that are capable within the model. San Francisco is a really interesting case in that they've actually over the last year been testing what development patterns might look like under a scenario of sea level rise in the Bay Area, and then also potentially under a severe earthquake and how the area might rebuild. So more of a resilience testing. I can tell you San Diego has been using this model quite a bit to support a new potential border crossing highway that Sandag might actually fund itself and has been working to develop. So there's lots of interesting scenarios. In Denver, we used Urban Sim model just to give support to a lot of transit-oriented development scenarios, which were at the forefront of everyone's minds when I was there in Denver. So there's lots of scenarios that can be run. They can be macroeconomic in nature. They can be testing different zoning conditions. That can be It can be environmental, it can be travel. So there's a lot of flexibility on what can be done. I think I'll end there. If anyone has any questions, I can answer those quickly. So.
All right, Sean, you can go to the next slide. If there are any other questions about this, we've supplied a handout that has background information on the land use modeling as well as UrbanSim, and there's a link there if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details of how the model is put together and operates. Next slide, Sean. Just to recap, I wanted to show the county control totals. And so this is what we are using as inputs into this model for each of the horizon years from 2017 being the base year out to the future year of 2045 for household. Next slide, Sean. Population, next slide. And employment. Next slide. And we've also provided a handout showing the small area projections from an initial model that we ran. I believe this iteration was the first attempt at incorporating zoning. We've been, looking at it with an eye of scrutiny. So if you find that the numbers are not what you expected, the hopes are that we are already addressing that for the next iteration. But we wanted to get this in your hands so that you can comment back to us if you think that something is off, either directly or get your staff in touch with us so that we can go over the details of the inner workings of the model to hopefully fix any of the issues that are coming up. Quickly walk through the handout just so it makes sense to you. On the left-hand side, we've got the decennial census numbers for population and households. Next to that is the 5-year 2017 ACS for population and households and the standard error for households. So whenever the ACS provides a number, they also have a range that they think is acceptable. We compared this to what UrbanSim has allocated from the block group level, which is how the information comes in from ACS, and assigns it to each parcel. And then in light blue, you can see the absolute difference. So this is where the households are varying from the 2017 estimate and the percentage of that. So typically what we're looking at are values that are above 6% on that far right light blue column are ones that we want to look at in greater detail. And then also supplied is the 2025 forecast, which is the first horizon, and the net change between 17 and 25. And this is used for the activity that we've been working with your staff on for the pipeline development that Dan was talking about earlier. Next slide, Sean. And this is a figure showing the local zoning ordinances. So these are what we've been working with your local staff on. I think I added it up this morning, and it's around 1,200 individual zoning designations that we have coded with maximum dwelling units per acre, floor area ratio, and allowable building types. This is what we've been following up with your local staff to make sure that we have correctly. But this is really the driver for how population, households, and employment are distributed in the future. Next slide, Sean. So the fun stuff, the maps. We've got the 2017 development pattern. This should look familiar to previous maps that we've shown with the last regional transportation plan, but this is every parcel that has a structure of significance on it in the year 2017. Next slide. This is what it would look like given the forecast that we're looking at right now in the year 2025. Next slide. And in the year 2045, it looks kind of scary how big that gray area gets. Sean, next slide. Of course, the scariness is, if there is any substantial structure on a parcel, in reality, there are different levels of development on each parcel. So we tried to aggregate it up to census blocks so that it's a little bit easier to understand. This is what the household density would look like looks like in 2017. Next slide. Shows what the expected growth and the impact on that in regards to household density would be. Next slide. And 2045. Pretty significant difference there. Next slide. And highlighted here in red are the blocks that are receiving the fastest absolute growth. So this is where the most households are being allocated between 2017 and 2045. Next slide. So the next series will be the same, and Sean, I'll let you kind of cycle through them. It's the same pattern as we just did for households, but for employment. And we've noticed that in the unincorporated areas, there was some issues with the way that it was allocating. So we've gotten in touch with Dan and his team, and I think have resolved that with the next iteration that we're working on. And one more. Thank you. And so also on the handout, on the lower section, involvement from local partners, and this is what I was speaking to earlier. We've been in contact with your local staff, and they've provided great input, great feedback. We're working with them to define that pipeline development. So anything that we believe to be under construction and opened in the near-term horizon, we want to make sure that we account for that and don't let the model guess at any large development that may be coming online in the next few years. Believe we started that last week, and so we've been working with your staff on that, and do appreciate their input. Next slide. And with that, I'll either open it up for questions or turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Max. If there's any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat box. A couple of other updates that we just wanted to provide. One is on the status update on the call for projects. We're currently up to about 350 plus projects that have been submitted for funding for the Unified Transportation Plan. In current dollars, I think that amounts to about 6.5 billion. And when you inflate out for year of expenditure, it's probably approaching around 10 billion. And staff have been taking those projects, mapping them, as well as going through kind of a QC process to make sure that the project applications are accurate, complete, and identifying any follow-up conversations with local project proponents or state project proponents on those project details. One thing, we are aware there are a number of ongoing studies and plans throughout the region actively going on, not only at GNRC, but also at TDOT and Metro Nashville. And so we are aware of the need to figure out how to integrate some of the recommendations from those studies as we move forward, so that we can evaluate those priorities as well for funding considerations. And then the only other item that we wanted to mention, I'll turn it over to Anna to give a brief update on the CARES Act.
Good morning, everyone. Just quickly, as many of you have probably guessed, our transit agencies have been experiencing significant challenges in coping with the impacts of the pandemic. As everyone's aware, at the end of March, Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act. That bill included $25 billion in relief to transit agencies. All of that money is at a 100% federal share. There's no local match required. and it goes to help prevent, prepare for, and respond to the COVID-19 situation. The funding is available to support capital, operating, and other expenses that are generally eligible under FTA's formula funding programs. Within our planning area, the Nashville-Davidson UZA received $75,737,828 in assistance through this program, and the Murfreesboro urbanized area received $6,450,398. Within the Nashville-Davidson UZA, we have several different agencies that are operating transit. Those groups have met to discuss needs arising in light of the pandemic, and GNRC has made a recommendation regarding the split of this funding among those agencies. We just want to keep you informed about that funding opportunity that was provided.
Thank you, Anna. I think those are all the updates that we have. Looks like we're ahead of schedule so far. Mayor Reed, do you want to follow up on any remaining items before we close?
Just anybody have any questions? I know that some have been asking in the chat box. I just wanted to make sure everybody was good. I want to thank you all for coming on to the webinar today. I hope you can see that staff is continuing to work even as they're working from home. Looks like Ken Moore has, what was the transit split for the agencies? Sean, do you want to take that?
I can respond to that.
Okay.
In the Nashville-Davidson UZA, the Nashville MTA is to receive $55,143,705. The Regional Transportation Authority is receiving $13,786,259. Franklin Transit is receiving $6,127,078. And Williamson County Transit is receiving $680,786.
Great, thanks, Anna. And Michael says he'll also share that distribution with our membership. Well, I just want to thank each one of you for being with us today. And I want you to know next month we will have a voting meeting. We will decide whether that meeting will be in person or whether it will be online based on whatever the governor puts forth at the end of the month. I just want to tell you, you're all doing a great job. Continue the good work, and our communities are depending on us. And I'm so glad to see each one of you have been stepping up. Thanks for being with us today. And if there's nothing else, then we're adjourned.
I have one question,
Sure.
quick question. This is Mayor Geyer, town of Coopertown. And we applied for a multimodal grant through TDOT, and they keep delaying a decision on that. And I'm working on the new fiscal year budget for 2021. So that would be some useful information in helping me do my budget. And then also Governor Lee, he's doubled the funding or grant back to local government. So the town's due to get $130,000, and that could be used towards street repair. So if TDOT could, please notify local government who they're going to award the multimodal grant out to help them plan their budget easier.
Great, thank you. And I did not look at the things to see who's on from TDOT. Sean, do you?
Hey, Melanie Murphy from TDOT is on.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we've also spoken to Michael Skipper just via email about this. We'll definitely get in touch with our multimodal office. I know with the pandemic, it's been delayed a little bit, unfortunately, but we'll definitely reach out to multimodal to see, if they have a approximate timeline of when those awards will be made. So yeah, as soon as we know more, I'll definitely relay that information to Michael and whoever else needs it.
And also, this is Jonathan Russell with TDOT. We provided a response to Michael, as Melanie stated. Mayor, please understand that these multimodal access grants are 100% ready to be announced. However, we received guidance from the governor's office that they were concerned about releasing grants that required a local match. So we are actually just waiting until that order is lifted or we get more advice on that. However, you do bring up a good point about budgets being prepared. So we'll see what we can do, but just know on TDOT's end, we're ready to announce that.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan and Melanie.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, if we have nothing else, then we will be getting in touch with you guys with any information between now and next month that keeps you all updated, as well as what our plans are for the meeting for next month. So be safe and take care of your communities. Thanks, you guys.